Welcome to Nebraskanomics, where we help Nebraskans remove barriers to opportunity with policy research and legislative advice. I'm your host, Jim Vokal, CEO of the Platte Institute, a Nebraska-based think tank promoting policies that make it easier to get a good job, start a business, and help Nebraskans keep more of what they earn. If you want more economic freedom in Nebraska, then let's get started. Welcome to this edition of Nebraskanomics. I'm Jim Vokal, your host. I'm pleased to be joined today by the president of the Nebraska Farm Bureau, Mark McHargue. Mark, welcome to Nebraskanomics.
Thank you so much. Privileged to be on with you, Jim, and certainly I've heard good things about this show and the things that you are teasing out. I think are just very important topics for those of our state to be talking about.
Well, agriculture is certainly important to the state. It's the backbone of our economy. And I just don't think a lot of people fully understand how large its footprint is, Mark. And that's why I wanted to bring you on the podcast today. Why don't you start by painting the picture of agriculture's role in Nebraska from an employment, economic impact, and all the industries connected to it? Let's just start there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You know, we a lot of times talk about the ag sector in Nebraska is the third largest ag sector in the entire nation. So when you put everything together, you put not only just our gross sales, but the labor side, the manufacturing that's associated with agriculture, ethanol, we are over about $110 billion impact to the state a year. 44% of Nebraska's total economics output comes from agriculture. And so we match Iowa as the two states in the country that are most affected by agriculture as far as just their entire economy. And we're pretty much matched there as far as of how much influence ag has on the economy of a particular state. And so that's pretty significant. We have about $38 billion in wages annually, both direct and indirect in economic development, our economic activity around the state. So again, that includes people that are involved in the food sector, manufacturing, all those sectors that get tied to ag or indirectly tied to ag. And so that's really significant. We're kind of leaders in corn, soybeans, cattle production. We're towards the top. And then on the biofuels side of the equation, we're number two. But relative to that, I would say we're number one relative to producing ethanol with a very low carbon score or sustainability. We absolutely can produce ethanol better than anybody else in the country relative to our carbon score.
So when people think about agriculture, Mark, they often just think about crops or cattle. You just outline certainly the footprint from an economic standpoint, but the industry is much broader than just crops and cattle. What are some of the sectors within agriculture that are especially important to Nebraska right now? You mentioned ethanol and a couple other things. Anything else you'd like to expand on?
Yeah, I mean, just to tease out ethanol just a bit more, I think in my mind, it's going to be one of the largest potential economic drivers in the state, partially because we have a carbon or CO2 pipeline that we can take the carbon out of those different plants and produce a product that the global community is wanting, especially the UK. They're very interested in low carbon fuels. A lot of our ethanol goes to California. They're very interested in that, and so we can use that and leverage that, and so that's significant because that's all corn and soybeans are part of that side of the equation. On the manufacturing side, I think it's interesting. You get into the bioeconomy, and we can produce almost anything that petroleum can be used for by growing it out of the ground. And I don't think people understand that concept, that if you can do it with oil, we can grow products that can be turned into and use it in the same method as almost any petroleum product. And so we start thinking about that. That opens up an incredible range of options that we can use our crops for, spin-offs, for so many things that, uh, to your point, Jim, people really don't think about.
So cattle prices are good, commodity prices not so great. How are producers feeling right now, Mark, heading into the second half of the year? And we're going to talk about national tariff and trade policies here after this.
Boy, Jim, it's about as tough. It's about as tough as I've seen it, uh, given especially the row crops. So when you get into the corn, soybeans, uh, even sorghum and wheat, we have been under profitable levels for a while now. And it's not that it's because our prices for the commodities are so low. It's the fact that our inputs have gone up so much. Just our fertilizer and equipment cost and labor cost and all those things um, have just put us at a level that we just don't have any margin. And so that, we're going on probably year 3 of that. You can do that for a couple of years. The ag sector tends to be pretty well capitalized, but you hear more and more people talking about having to either sell a piece of property, or rearrange some things in a significant way that's going to reduce their ability to produce just to get capital to kind of get through. So I think we're on one of the last years before something major probably will happen. So
You mentioned some of the input costs have gone up, and I'm sure that trade and tariffs have become a major part of that. It's certainly part of the national conversation. Agriculture is often one of the industries most directly impacted by trade policy. How are our producers in Nebraska, Mark, thinking about tariffs right now, and what impact has the tariffs had on the Nebraska ag sector?
yeah, I mean that's a big question that we've struggled with significantly. Early on in this administration's conversations around tariffs, we were very clear that we wanted the tariffs to be used as a tool, not something that's used across the board to help fund our government. But we have what's probably been most disruptive, in my opinion, has been the on and off again of these tariff conversations. And so you have a tariff come on, then you take it off, or it's softened, or it's doubled, or it's whatever goes on there. What that does is it breeds uh, just instability. So if you're a country that wants to trade with us, or we're selling something to somebody else, which we do a lot in agriculture, we're highly involved in the export market. You have traders that what do they do? I mean, they've spent how many hundreds of thousands to get something on a boat, and they don't know what the price is going to be when it hits the shore, or if there's going to be changes when it hits there. And so I think that disruption on those long-term trading partnerships, I think there's a question in people's minds now: is the U.S. a good trading partner? So you stack all that together, Jim, and I think that disruption has created some price appreciation just because of that. Maybe not the tariff alone, but as things shift around and they go to different places and come from different countries, all of that uncertainty, I think fundamentally has raised prices. As a long answer to your question. But
Well, and the uncertainty of the tariffs certainly comes into play as well with access to global markets. I'm sure, and you can certainly talk about how trade relationships matter so much to our producers in rural communities.
yeah, so just just this week, I spent several days with a country that's a significant country that they want to buy substantial amount of soybeans, substantial amount of corn. They're really interested in our beef. They're interested in investing in Nebraska, and uh, those kind of conversations are circling all the time. And it's like, how do we How do we take advantage of that? So then you get into the tariff conversation, then you get into the availability, then you get into uh, who does this country truly want to partner with? Do they want to partner with a Brazil, or do they actually want to partner with the U.S. More significantly and move away from some of these other countries? And so those are the kind of conversations I've been involved in just this last week. Very high level conversations that could make a significant difference to Nebraska, but we have to walk through those doors when we're presented with it within reason, right?
Sure. Well, let's turn now to Nebraska state policy and property taxes. I'm sure are on your radar. They continue to be one of the biggest issues we hear about in Nebraska. From the Farm Bureau's perspective, Mark, how significant is the property tax burden on agricultural producers today? And for people outside of your industry, what does that burden actually look like for a family farm or ranch operation?
Yeah, I mean, so the check that we write has come down in the ag sector. So the check that I write for the land that I own, when it's all in, all the credits are put together, and it's the check that I have to sign. It has come down, but it is creeping back up now, and we have actually, in my opinion, have have performed some good work to lower the burden, meaning the check you write for property tax. Now, that's not holding. We're gonna go up to whatever 250 million dollars a year if we do nothing. It just automatic, right? And so that's what we're really concerned about. That's the reason that we we really push to put a cap in this year at 2%. It's like, you know what? Doggone it. Let's just put a cap, and we will start there. And then we can sort things out after that, but we just have to say we are not going to spend any more or ask any more than this amount. And it wasn't zero. It was 2 or 2.5%. We in the ag sector, we had really good buy-in on that concept. It wasn't rolling our taxes back like some people would like. In a perfect world, we would, pay 25% less taxes than we do now on our real estate. But in the world of reality, if we could hold where we're at and just gain slightly, that would be a win. I mean, we would consider that a win. We talked about that as a win all year last year. If we could just do this one item, that would be a win. And couldn't even get that across the fence.
Well, Iowa across the border just passed a property tax cap of 2%. And I know that that's been a priority to you. And to your point, property taxes are the result of spending, and controlling the growth of the property tax burden is critically important. So as you look ahead to next section, Mark, if you had a crystal ball, what would the Farm Bureau think as their top priorities as it relates to property taxes?
I think as we look for next year, I think we did have a good sound conversation on this cap. Unfortunately, we couldn't get the discussion on the floor. So, at a minimum, we want to continue to move that concept forward, because I think it did have good support. On the flip side, Jim, we don't have our heads in the sand, and we realize that we do need to broaden the base long term to supply for the needs of Nebraskans. I mean, we have roads to take care of. We have a lot of things that cost money. Those things are all going up as well. I mean, it's not like the cost to you know bring in teachers and all these things that we depend on as public entities. We want them to run efficiently, as absolute efficient as possible, all those things, but those costs are going up as well. So we are strong supporters of broadening the base. And what we mean by broadening the base is pulling off some of those sales tax that have been exempted. We've been very open and clear about that. Possibly raising the sales tax, but put it on more goods, spread it apart, spread it across so nobody feels it significantly. But the one thing, Jim, that's very, very important, absolutely important in this conversation is that we do not think it's good tax policy to put sales tax on business to business exchanges, meaning like for us, taxing seed corn in the in the production practice
Right.
of over farming. So taxing inputs, I mean, that will be a no-go because it's just not tax policy. But there is hundreds of millions of dollars outside of that we would be okay with and would are more than willing to have a legitimate conversation about.
Well, the Platte student has long stressed as well that business input should be off the table as it relates to the expansion of the sales tax base. So we are in alignment there. The other critical factor of any base broadening is that it should align with some sort of a tax decrease on the other side of things. This last session, Mark, Platte spent a lot of time, and the Farm Bureau also partnered with us championing an ag zoning reform bill. Can you explain why predictable and transparent zoning rules matter for agriculture and especially livestock and dairy operations looking to expand?
Yeah, this is something we were real excited about. We've worked on for a while. So if I could paint for your listeners a scenario, say they wanted to uh, build a small store because they've got a business that's growing and they want to build a store, but they don't know how much that store is going to cost. They don't know if they could actually put it where they want to put it. Um, they don't know if neighbors are going to say, yeah, we don't want you to build a store there. I mean, and all those things. Well, that's what's going on right now in the livestock siding arena. We have a set of rules. Each county has a set of rules for the most part, majority of them, that kind of outline what a producer would have to go through to get a facility sited. Well, the problem is that a producer decides to do that, but then there's a lot of things outside of his control, especially votes of county officials, that they could just choose to not let it happen. I mean, and so now you have a producer that spent maybe tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars getting everything to the point, and then have a set of commissioners to hold it up, maybe hold it up for maybe a 2 year. Well, if it's been held up over the last couple of years, you know that construction costs from 3 years ago compared to now is probably a third higher, just because some people have the ability to stall it. So what the primary part of this legislation really is, let's make sure counties outline just exactly what they want. Give them local control, let them outline it. But when a producer then turns their paperwork in, they've got a certain amount of days that action has to take place. And then they have to follow their guidelines of how they have said they would go through and evaluate this facility. And so it just gives some parameters around the producer, so the producer has more certainty, because these are high dollar investments. And if you do all the work, you do all the analysis, and then you just get all this pushback, the ag sector starts saying, you know what, I just don't know if I want to make those investments. I don't know if I want to go through all of to ultimately still have to figure out how to make this profitable. So that's what's going on. We need livestock expansion. That's one of the number one pushes that we have in Nebraska especially on the dairy side. And so we want to make that as smooth as possible.
This issue first came to our forefront when I was traveling in Northeast Nebraska, meeting with livestock uh, operations, and they were telling us just how crazy it was that they could structure or expand neighboring county, but a county that they lived in, they'd face this resistance and predictability, consistency for an industry that is critical to the state's growth is, I think, pretty important. And regulatory burdens and some of these obstacles that we just talked about, Mark, are just as damaging as high taxes to ag operations.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about all the time. We need to grow Nebraska, grow our way out of some of this stuff. Well, we have to structure the environment so we can grow. There's plenty of people that want to grow, but we need to take away some of these barriers. And this was just an example, some barriers in the livestock sector that we feel like we have started to unpeel that, and hopefully will allow for some more growth that we desperately need in Nebraska.
So we talked about property tax reform. We talked about ag reform that was just accomplished this session. Looking ahead to next legislative session, Mark, what are going to be some of Nebraska Farm Bureau's biggest priorities?
Well, I think we'll continue to work on this property tax side of the equation. The economic development uh, conversation in Nebraska is really significant, and so I think we're going to probably be looking at uh, possibly some more incentive programs that maybe can help on the ag side. Um, we're going to be looking at ways that how can we ensure that businesses that do want to come to Nebraska that fit into the whole sector that it touches ag somewhere. How do we ensure that Nebraska's open for them? On the policy side, I would there's probably not a ton of policy around that, but when you get into the biofuel side of the equation, we may need to look at some more tax credits for some of these biofuel projects. They're expensive, uh, but as a way to certainly leverage Nebraska's opportunity. So I would say in those arenas, I'm not sure where we're at on water. We're just short water right now, Western Nebraska, but there's probably not a policy, may not be a policy conversation necessarily, but anything that's around the economy. So that does get into data centers. We'll be working on policy of data centers, probably some more policy around energy, because these different entities that we've talked about, they do take energy. How we're going to prioritize um, the energy conversation in Nebraska, I think is going to be really important. So just a couple things there, Jim.
So we have some opportunities to grow in areas like value-added agriculture, livestock production, food processing. As you look ahead and analyze how Nebraska needs to be competitive and keep the next generation in agriculture, what do policymakers, lawmakers, stakeholders need to get right over the next few years um, to position Nebraska to be as competitive as we can, Mark?
Yeah, it's something I think about a lot, probably almost every day. Uh, you get to be my age and probably your age, you start thinking about your kids and your grandkids and how they're going to perform. You want them to stay in Nebraska, and it's really simple for me on the ag side. You you give profitability in the ag sector, we will have kids come back. I mean that's you have profitability, that'll bring kids back to the rural Nebraska. But if there's not, it's going to be difficult. So when I look out there, I think we have to be a state that says yes. I think we have to be communities that say yes. We're In a second life, I own a construction company that's building, finishing a house every 2 weeks in rural communities. And we have to have communities that don't just say they want to grow, they actually have to take those steps and take advantage of the programs and encourage people to, yes, we will partner with you to uh, build a daycare, put in a housing development, bring in that small manufacturer, uh, and we will do that with open arms, and we will help facilitate all the questions and the people around that to get that done. And if we can do that as a state, so philosophically, I think we have to just say we can't say that we're fine with where we're at. And I think that's going to be one of the big questions over the next couple of years is how can we, if you ask the majority of people in Nebraska, is Nebraska moving forward? And they said, yeah, we're pretty excited about some of the stuff going on in Nebraska. I think that's the litmus test. And I think if we get to that point, it'll be there. How does that work into policy? I mean, that's the tough one. We have to have the tax structure right.
Right.
Can't be way above all of our peers on our tax structure. And we can work on that. But there's more than that. There is a culture that we need to continue to say that we want our kids here. And when we sit around the dinner table, we're encouraging our kids to find an occupation that's going to be here in Nebraska.
Mark, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners about your industry or how the Farm Bureau works? Future?
Yeah, we've just talked about a lot of different things, and agriculture. Probably my main point is agriculture does touch every single person in Nebraska one way or another, and we've talked about those different ways. But for me and for Nebraska Farm Bureau, our highest calling, the reason that I get up every day, is to ensure that we have markets for the products and commodities that we grow and the products that we produce, that we can compete in a low regulatory environment, and that we have fiscal accountability. I mean, that almost everything Farm Bureau does fits in underneath those buckets. And so that's the reason you see Farm Bureau involved in conversations about economic development, conversation about regulatory control, conversation about taxes, conversations about how do we grow our rural communities. Why do we talk to the urban folks in Omaha and Lincoln? Because there's major powerhouse players in the ag sector that are influencing, and economic dollars are flowing through those different sectors. And so I'll probably just leave you with, Jim, another thing that I'm really committed to is helping us merge or blur any of the lines between rural and urban in Nebraska. Nebraska is too important for us to be segmented into the rural side and the urban side. I'm very committed to having those conversations, any conversation with anybody that wants to have a conversation about ag. Because my experience has been, Jim, that when you talk to almost anybody in Nebraska, doesn't matter where they're from, you draw two circles, 90% of those circles overlap and we agree. And there may be 10%, but we can't let that 10% that we disagree on really split us apart on any of these big conversations.
Well said, Mark. Thank you for your leadership in Nebraska. My guest today on Nebraskanomics has been the president of the Nebraska Farm Bureau, Mark McHargue. Mark, thanks again.
Absolutely, Jim. Anytime.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you want more economic freedom in Nebraska, please visit platteinstitute.org to make a donation to help fund our research and advocacy. Or you can subscribe to our newsletter and learn about today's most important issues facing Nebraskans. It's time to stop the status quo. Let's remove economic barriers and make Nebraskans proud.